The drive back to Tribeca was a 20-minute masterclass in shared silence. The atmosphere inside the car was sterilized, heavy with the metallic tang of unspent rage and the residue of professional defeat. Andrew did not speak. He drove with the controlled efficiency of a man running out a clock. Olivia stared out the window at the receding city lights, the motion blurring the painful memory of Ethan's victorious smirk. She had forced the confrontation, but the victory felt hollow, replaced by a cold, stomach-dropping certainty of the fallout. The sedan pulled into the quiet, pristine garage. They rode the private elevator up to their floor, the space so small it amplified the distance between them. In the silence, Andrew felt a familiar, creeping need for order. The messiness of human emotion was an unacceptable variable. When they entered the apartment, Andrew went straight to the liquor cabinet, pouring 2 fingers of amber scotch into a heavy crystal glass, for himself. Olivia stood by the window, shedding the plum-colored silk dress like a snakeskin, revealing a simple slip beneath. She needed no alcohol. Her blood was already hot with the volatile mix of shame and intoxicating freedom. Andrew set his glass down on the granite counter, the clink sharp and definitive. He didn't raise his voice. In his world, volume was the tool of the losing side. Let's be clear, Olivia. This is not about fidelity. This is about leverage and reputation management. Olivia turned, her eyes dark and challenging. And you think I don't know that? You think I went there for a grand romantic gesture? I went there because I wanted to feel something that wasn't filtered through your P&L statements. I needed to know I was capable of generating a feeling that didn't require a 7-figure contract. Feelings are ephemeral, Olivia. They are poor collateral. What you risked tonight is tangible. My partnership, your position at the gallery, and the financial security that allows you to buy dresses and miss an artist from 10 years ago. She laughed, a thin, brittle sound that broke the silence more effectively than a scream. The partnership. Always the partnership. Do you even remember what I look like when I'm not standing next to you at a gala? You look at me and you see a dependent asset, Andrew, a beautifully curated reflection of your success. The accusation stung, not because it wasn't fair, but because it was precisely true. Andrew walked toward his briefcase, which still lay open on the desk from his earlier work session. He pulled out a tablet. You want to talk about assets? Let's talk about your gallery. He tapped the screen, bringing up a spreadsheet. I ran a brief due diligence search on the Maxwell Trust while you were having your little emotional fling. They handled the gallery's endowments, correct? Olivia's challenging posture faltered. Her artistic pride was one of the few things she held sacred, and the gallery was her fortress. What are you doing? I'm establishing boundaries. Your director, Clara, took out a personal loan against the gallery's operational capital to acquire that new Rothko piece. It's a violation of fiduciary duty. It's technically embezzlement. He pushed the tablet across the counter. I found it in under an hour. Imagine what the U.S. Attorney's Office could find in a week. Olivia picked up the tablet, her hands trembling as she scrolled through the damning details. The shock was visceral. She had shielded herself from the gallery's financials, trusting Clara implicitly, preferring to immerse herself in the art rather than accounting. You wouldn't, she whispered, the threat too enormous, too cold-blooded. You would ruin Clara, the gallery, and everything I've built just to keep a secret? I am not doing this to keep a secret, Olivia, Andrew corrected, his voice flat. I am doing this to control the narrative. You introduced a volatile variable, Ethan, and you did it publicly. This is my leverage to ensure that you comply with the only thing that matters now, maintaining the fiction of our marriage until I secure the partnership, and then at the time of my choosing, we will manage the separation with discretion. He leaned in, his gaze penetrating, demanding absolute understanding. Your relationship with Ethan Thorne is now a Class B liability on my books, and I will neutralize all liabilities, no matter the cost to others. If this goes public, not only will I destroy Ethan's questionable reputation, which will be simple, trust me, but I will hand over the Maxwell Trust evidence to the authorities, making sure your independence, your entire career, is vaporized in the resulting scandal. You will be free, but you will be penniless and professionally radioactive." He gave her a moment for the weight of the threat to sink in. She looked utterly defeated, the reckless fire extinguished by the icy rain of his corporate power. She realized the terrible truth. Andrew didn't need to love her to destroy her. He simply needed the law. "What do you want?" she finally asked, her voice raspy, the sound of her surrender. "I want the performance to continue, flawlessly. We will be seen at the benefit this weekend. We will host the Harrisons for dinner on Thursday. You will cut off all contact with Ethan Thorne, and you will give me unfettered access to all your communications, effective immediately." He paused, his gaze hardening. "And you will stop looking at me like I am the devil. I am merely the consequence of your impulsive adolescent choice." Olivia dropped the tablet back on the counter. It landed with a soft, final thud. Her eyes were filled with not hate, but with a profound, terrifying emptiness. "You win, Andrew. You've proven that the price of my 2 hours of freedom is the destruction of my future. Congratulations. You've successfully managed the risk." She turned and walked toward the master suite, her back straight but her shoulders slumped. Andrew watched her go, a small cold satisfaction settling in his gut. The crisis was averted, the liability was contained, he had won the legal battle. But as he picked up his glass of scotch, the victory tasted like ash. He had saved his career, but in the process, he had looked at the one person who saw his emotional poverty and threatened to ruin her life just to silence her. He realized that the silence she was walking into now was not compliance. It was a deeper, more dangerous form of disengagement. He was left alone in the expensive, ordered apartment, a conqueror surveying a landscape he had utterly scorched. The cost of winning was the certainty that he would never feel safe or loved again.
A quiet Tuesday night in a glass-walled apartment overlooking the glittering skyline of Chicago, the kind of perfect, curated stillness that wealthy, overworked couples mistake for peace. Then, the stark blue glow of a phone on the mahogany table, followed by a text message that shatters the fragile illusion. 3 lines that confirm a terrifying suspicion. She is with him, and she expects the husband to clean up the mess. Every marriage holds a secret, but some secrets are not just hidden, they are weaponized. If you've ever felt the sharp, dangerous edges of a love like this, stay with me. There are so many more layers to peel back behind this closed door. The scent of cedar and a faint, expensive French wine hung over Andrew Vance's living room, a perfect calibrated stillness. It was 11:37 p.m. on a Tuesday, a time when the city outside the 31st floor windows of his Tribeca apartment had settled into a humming, industrious quiet. He was a man accustomed to stillness, to the meticulous order of things. As a corporate litigator for one of Manhattan's most ruthless firms, Andrew's life was a testament to control. Tonight, he was reviewing a pretrial brief, the yellow legal pad a beacon under the warm glow of a minimalist lamp. The only sound was the faint, rhythmic pulse of the ventilation system and the whisper of the turning pages. His wife, Olivia, was already asleep in the master suite, or so he believed. The lack of sound from her side of the apartment had always been a feature, not a bug, of their 6-year marriage. They had reached a sophisticated, modern plateau of coexistence, shared financial goals, synchronized social appearances, and separate, silent orbits. He had provided the gilded cage, and she had, until now, inhabited it gracefully. The phone, a sleek object of dark metal, vibrated on the polished mahogany end table. Not a ring, but a deep, insistent thrum that spoke of urgency. Andrew picked it up, expecting a late-night email from his junior associate, a last-minute panic over a merger agreement. Instead, the screen blazed with a message from Olivia. His breath hitched, not in fear, but in a sudden cold premonition of disorder. He read the block of text twice, the words stark white against the digital black. "My wife texted, I'm at the club with my ex, come pick me up, don't ask why." The ex, Ethan Thorne. The name was a ghost in their life, a history of art school recklessness that Olivia had supposedly traded in for Andrew's stability. Andrew did not feel the sharp, visceral pain of a man whose heart has been cleaved. He felt the slower, deeper burn of professional insult and systemic failure. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was a logistical problem, a catastrophic public relations blunder waiting to happen. He imagined the headline, the smirking whispers in the partner's dining room. His reputation, forged in years of relentless moral compromise, was suddenly fragile. He rose slowly, the legal pad falling silently onto the thick Persian rug. His limbs moved with the stiff precision of a man operating on pure adrenaline and cold logic. He went to the closet, shedding the comfortable cashmere sweater he'd been wearing, and replaced it with a dark, impeccably tailored suit jacket, an emotional shield. His preparation was purely defensive. He wasn't going to save his marriage, he was going to execute a critical damage control operation. He paused by the marble counter, his gaze catching his own reflection in the darkened glass of a framed photograph, a wedding portrait, all white teeth and filtered light. His smile in the photo was wide, practiced, and now, in the quiet, unforgiving light of the apartment, felt entirely alien. He pressed his palms flat against the cool stone, trying to ground himself. Andrew pulled his keys from the bowl, the fob for the armored black sedan waiting 3 floors below in the climate-controlled garage. Before leaving, he sent a single controlled reply. He wouldn't engage the "don't ask why" ultimatum. He would simply comply, reducing her rebellion to a minor errand. On my way. Where exactly? Olivia's response was immediate, almost too quick, as if she had been staring at the screen, waiting for him to submit. The Viper Room. Ask for Ethan's table. The Viper Room, of course. Not some anonymous midtown cocktail lounge, but the kind of place where art and music intersected with genuine, messy vice. The exact kind of chaos Andrew had systematically purged from his life, and he thought, from hers. The request to ask for Ethan's table was the final, stinging detail. It wasn't a secret plea. It was a deliberate, calculated humiliation performed for the benefit of her ex, and now for Andrew himself. The elevator ride down was an exercise in pure sensory deprivation. The polished steel doors, the silence, the smooth descent, a deliberate isolation from the messy reality awaiting him. But the illusion of control was cracking. He had been so focused on climbing the hierarchy of New York that he had failed to notice the structure he lived in. His own marriage had become structurally unsound. He had mistaken order for happiness and silence for loyalty. As he stepped out into the garage, the air was suddenly cold, heavy with the exhaust and the metallic smell of concrete. He walked towards the obsidian gleam of his sedan, the car a fortress against the coming disaster. He was driving towards a truth he desperately did not want to see, not because it broke his heart, but because it threatened to unravel the meticulously woven fabric of his entire existence. The city lights of New York, usually a symbol of his power and achievement, now felt like 1,000 eyes watching him. A very successful man being summoned like a glorified chauffeur by the wife who was currently with the failure she should have forgotten years ago. He got into the driver's seat, the engine catching with a low, expensive growl. He pulled out of the garage and onto the empty, echoing streets of downtown, chasing a dangerous, intoxicating ghost from his wife's past. The silence in the car was vast and threatening, far louder than any confession could have been.
The black sedan cut through the deserted canyons of Midtown, the engine's low, steady rumble a counterpoint to the static tension coiling in Andrew's chest. The Viper Room was in the West Village, a 30-minute drive that felt, under the circumstances, like an involuntary, high-stakes road trip with a corpse in the trunk. The corpse of his marriage. He should have been raging. He should have been calling his lawyer or his wife, demanding answers. Instead, he was performing a clinical assessment of his options. Option A, show up, retrieve Olivia, and handle the inevitable public scandal with a unified, tightly controlled front. Option B, refuse, force her to deal with the consequences of her recklessness, and initiate divorce proceedings, risking a messier, costlier settlement, but preserving his pride. He reached for his phone, resting in the center console. He wasn't calling Olivia. He was calling the lead associate on the Sterling-Hartman merger, leaving a concise, late-night instruction to review the liability clauses related to moral turpitude of executive spouses. The action was reflexive, a muscle memory honed by his career. His response to emotional crisis was legal triage. Moral turpitude. The phrase echoed in his mind, dry and clinical, applying perfectly to the woman he was speeding towards. He had married Olivia for her grace, her beauty, her art world connections, the final, aesthetic component to his self-made empire. He had mistaken her quiet, artistic melancholy for contentment, her lack of passion for devotion. He thought of the slow, gradual erosion of touch between them. It hadn't been a sudden event, but a recession, like the sea pulling back from the shore inch by painful inch. He remembered a night 3 months ago, after a major victory in court. He had come home, adrenaline humming, and found Olivia curled up on the sofa with a novel. He'd leaned down to kiss her, a triumphant, proprietarial gesture. She had turned her cheek, murmuring, "I have to finish this chapter, Andrew." The rejection was minimal, almost accidental, but it had felt like a small, sharp splinter under his skin. He hadn't tried again. He realized now that he hadn't touched her, not truly touched her, in over a year. Their intimacy had been relegated to the transactional: shared space, shared meals, shared beds with an invisible but unbreachable boundary down the middle. A notification flashed on the screen. A new text from Ethan Thorne, or rather from the number Andrew had blocked years ago but had recognized instantly. It was a photo, a close-up shot of a blurry cocktail glass and Olivia's hand, her diamond wedding band flashing unmistakable in the dark club light, resting on a man's forearm. The man's face was deliberately out of frame, but the context was damning. Below the picture, a caption: "Great catch-up. Some things never change." The message was not sent to Olivia or even to Andrew's primary business line. It was sent to a group chat that included 3 of Olivia's closest, most talkative friends, and perhaps most strategically, an interior designer who was notoriously close to the senior partners' wives. Andrew's grip on the leather steering wheel tightened until his knuckles went white. It wasn't the photo itself that broke his composure, but the sheer, brazen calculation of the ex. Ethan wasn't just pursuing Olivia. He was pursuing Andrew's destruction via the New York social wire, using Olivia's humiliation as the detonator. Ethan wasn't just a lover. He was a strategic opponent, and Andrew finally felt the genuine, icy chill of hate. He sped up on the empty West Side highway, the skyscraper lights turning into a dizzying smear. The drive now felt like a desperate chase, not a retrieval. He had been played. Olivia's message, "Don't ask why," was not just a taunt to him, but a signal to Ethan: he's coming. He pulled off the highway and navigated the narrow, cobblestone streets of the village. The Viper Room looked exactly as he'd remembered it from the handful of times he had been dragged there by younger colleagues. A low, neon-lit door with a bored bouncer. He parked illegally directly across the street, letting the sedan idle. He needed a moment to recalibrate his strategy, to strip away the rising fury and replace it with the cold, lawyerly mask. He looked at his reflection in the rearview mirror. His suit was perfect, his tie straight, his expression neutral. The mask was in place. He ran a hand through his hair, smoothing down a stray strand. Before leaving the safety of the car, he sent one final preemptive text to Olivia. He didn't want to engage in a scene in front of Ethan. He needed to exert his authority, reminding her of the unspoken contract of their marriage: loyalty, or at least discretion. "Wait outside. I have no intention of walking in there. I'm giving you 5 minutes." He put the phone in his inner jacket pocket and stepped out into the damp city night air. The music from the club was a deep, infectious bass line that vibrated through the pavement, a soundtrack of recklessness. He stood under the thin light of a street lamp, the silhouette of a successful man waiting for his wife. The 5 minutes stretched. Every passing car felt like a potential witness, every shadow a hidden camera. Andrew waited, still and silent, counting the seconds, the humiliation hardening into a protective shell of resolve. He was here to collect property, not a person. He would save his reputation tonight if it meant burying his heart and Olivia's freedom in the process. The glass door of the Viper Room finally swung open. Olivia appeared, moving slowly, silhouetted against the bright interior. She wasn't alone. Ethan Thorne, taller, with the easy arrogance of a man who makes a living off his charm, stood beside her. Ethan rested a familiar, possessive hand on the small of Olivia's back. Andrew watched the two of them pause, their eyes adjusting to the outside darkness, the quiet a sudden painful contrast to the noise inside. Ethan leaned down, murmuring something into Olivia's ear that made her smile, a slow, intimate curve of her lips that Andrew hadn't seen directed at him in years. He watched this small, devastating piece of theater from across the street. This was the moment of truth. Olivia's eyes finally found Andrew's across the width of the empty street. Her smile vanished. Her hand instinctively recoiled from Ethan's touch. The choice had been made, whether she liked it or not. Ethan turned, following Olivia's gaze, and recognized Andrew. The musician's smirk widened, a look of pure, unapologetic triumph. Andrew pushed off the car, crossing the street with long, determined strides. He wasn't walking, he was closing. The confrontation was about to begin, and Andrew, the master manipulator of facts, knew exactly which parts of the truth he was going to destroy first.
The air hitting Andrew's face was thick with cheap smoke and the perfume of desperation. He crossed the street with the measured, predatory gait of a lawyer entering a hostile courtroom. He didn't accelerate, he intensified. Olivia stood frozen beside the club entrance, bathed in the sickly green light of the neon sign. She was wearing a dress Andrew hadn't seen before, silk, the color of bruised plums, dangerously cut. Her face, usually so composed and classically beautiful, was flushed, softened by wine and recklessness. She looked younger, freer, and entirely unlike the wife who supervised the household staff and curated collections. Ethan Thorne was already moving toward Andrew, a smile of infuriating casual victory etched on his face. He was dressed in the uniform of the creatively successful, expensive jeans, a leather jacket that looked genuinely worn, not purchased to look so. He wasn't a threat Andrew could calculate with a spreadsheet, he was a human variable. "Andrew," Ethan said, his voice perfectly calibrated, polite enough for a public space, loaded enough to convey maximum insolence. He extended his hand. "I hear you're playing chauffeur tonight. That's big of you." Andrew ignored the hand. He stopped precisely 3 feet away, close enough to exert pressure, but not close enough for Ethan to read the fury vibrating under his tailored jacket. He addressed Olivia, his voice a low, disciplined register that cut through the club's bass rumble. "Olivia, we're leaving." Olivia flinched, not from the words, but the absence of emotion in them. She looked from her husband's cold, authoritative face to Ethan's mocking gaze. The fleeting joy of her rebellion seemed to have curdled into immediate regret. "I just needed a minute," she murmured, clutching a tiny beaded purse. "I'm fine. I asked him for a drink." "You asked me to pick you up," Andrew corrected, his eyes fixed on the subtle bruise of color high on her cheekbones. "You also informed me not to ask why. That's not the request of a woman who is merely having a drink. That's the demand of a woman seeking extraction." Ethan chuckled, a short performative sound. "Don't psychoanalyze the lady, Vance. She just missed someone who actually sees her." He took a step closer to Olivia, resting the same possessive hand on her lower back, a gesture of ownership that was both familiar and utterly devastating. "We were just talking about the old times, before the Tribeca apartment and the white glove events. Remember when Olivia used to draw in her sketchbook, not just approve invoices for the gallery? You've got the structure, Andrew, but I've got the archives." The true humiliation wasn't the words, but the fact that Andrew knew Ethan was right. He had starved the passionate artistic core of his wife, exchanging it for security. He turned his attention fully to Ethan, his eyes finally locking. His expression did not change, but the air around him dropped 10 degrees. "I understand the performance, Mr. Thorne. It's effective. You've chosen to stage your drama on a public thoroughfare, and you've employed my wife as your lead actress. The contract, however, remains mine. Olivia is legally and financially bound to me. You may enjoy the preview, but you don't own the rights to the show." He didn't use any legal jargon, but the implied threat, the cold, systemic power of his firm, his bank accounts, his network was unmistakable. "Come on, Andrew, that's a lawyer talking, not a husband. And you are a musician talking, not a solution." Andrew shot back, the slight emphasis on solution suggesting Ethan was a temporary indulgence, an emotional debt. Andrew took hold of Olivia's wrist, his touch firm, but not cruel. A proprietary grasp that felt more like a handcuff than a connection. He pulled her gently but decisively toward the black sedan. "We have an early start tomorrow, Olivia. The Vance name has appearances to maintain."
He used their shared surname like a chain. As Andrew steered Olivia away, he glanced back at Ethan. The musician stood alone in the green glow, his triumphant smirk faltering, replaced by a dark, simmering rage. The streetlights caught a brief, unsettling flash of something desperate in Ethan's eyes, the realization that his emotional victory was costing him the woman he claimed to love. Olivia was silent as Andrew opened the passenger door. She slid in, sinking into the leather seat like a defeated soldier. Andrew got into the driver's seat. He didn't start the car immediately. The two of them sat there, the engine silent, the space between them vast and echoing. "Why, Olivia?" Andrew finally asked, breaking the don't ask why rule, not out of curiosity, but obligation. She didn't look at him. She stared straight ahead at the city lights. "Because you make me feel like I'm a line item on your balance sheet, Andrew. And for 2 hours, Ethan made me feel like I was the whole goddamn budget." Her words were the first genuine, raw truth Andrew had heard from her in years. They didn't hurt his heart, but they were a direct, precise strike against his carefully constructed identity as a provider and a success. He knew that any reply he made now would sound like a defense brief. He turned the key and the powerful engine roared to life, drowning out her words, his shame, and the messy, chaotic truth of the night. He pulled the car into the street, leaving the West Village, the club, and the ghost of Ethan Thorne behind. But as they drove, Andrew glanced down at the passenger seat. Olivia's right hand was resting on her lap, and the bright, heavy glint of the diamond wedding band looked, under the passing streetlights, less like a symbol of eternal love and more like a heavy, golden cage. He began formulating his legal strategy for the inevitable divorce, but an unsettling thought surfaced. What if this was not about Ethan or even Olivia, but about forcing Andrew to pay attention?
The morning arrived, not with the gentle intrusion of dawn, but with the cold, insistent pulse of Andrew's professional anxiety. He was already awake at 5 a.m., showered, and dressed in his sharpest three-piece suit, armor against the coming day. Olivia was still in the master suite, the door silently closed, a barrier that felt more permanent than any argument. The air in the apartment felt thin, pressurized by the unspoken terms of their new, fragile truce. Andrew descended to his home office, a fortress of steel and dark wood, and opened his secure browser. He didn't check the Wall Street Journal. He went straight to the Scintillation, a notorious anonymous gossip blog that traded in the discreet failures and spectacular scandals of New York's elite. He searched for his name, bracing himself for the inevitable. It was worse than he anticipated. The post wasn't an item buried deep in a column. It was the top feature, titled "Tribeca's Prince of Litigation and the Viper Room Regret." The post featured the blurry photo Ethan had sent last night, now cropped and enhanced. Olivia's diamond ring on one hand, her other hand reaching towards an indistinct figure with the signature red neon of the club unmistakable in the background. The text accompanying the photo was a venomous stream of innuendo, alleging marital discord, professional neglect, and a reckless rediscovery of an old flame. Andrew felt a cold wave wash over him, not of fear, but of exposure. The private chaos he had desperately tried to manage was now a public spectacle, visible to every rival, every partner, and every competitor. The professional sanctity he had fought for was instantly soiled. His phone rang, the number belonging to Marcus Thorne, the senior partner at the firm and Andrew's primary mentor. The name, sharing the same surname as Ethan, was a coincidence Andrew had always found darkly amusing, but the man himself was deadly serious. "Andrew," Marcus's voice was low, devoid of greeting, carrying the precise weight of decades of accumulated power. "I'm looking at the Scintillation. My wife is looking at the Scintillation, and as of 8 o'clock, every shareholder in Chicago will be looking at the Scintillation." "Sir, I'm aware," Andrew said, his voice measured. "This is a domestic issue, one that is being addressed with discretion." "Discretion? Andrew, your wife was photographed in a compromising position with a musician at a B-list club. The firm is currently negotiating the largest, most ethically delicate merger of the fiscal year. Our clients value stability and moral certainty. Your personal life is not personal when it threatens the integrity of a billion-dollar deal."
Marcus gave him the ultimatum, his voice turning ice cold. You have exactly 1 week to ensure this narrative is not just dead, but retracted. You will not attend any client-facing meetings until I say so. You will resolve this perfectly, Andrew. Perfectly. Because failure here suggests a lack of control that I cannot afford in my successor. If you cannot manage your wife, how can you manage a hostile takeover? The finality in the senior partner's voice was the sound of Andrew's ambition being held hostage. The ethical ultimatum wasn't just about the affair, it was about the very core of his public persona. The narrative of the disciplined, infallible man. Andrew sat, staring at the screen after the call ended. The silence felt different now, less a refuge, more a vast echo chamber. He needed more than control. He needed leverage against the world itself. He needed to destroy the source of the mess. Ethan Thorne. He pulled up the comprehensive financial profiles he had run on both Olivia and Ethan the night before. Ethan was a talented musician, but perpetually on the edge of financial ruin, heavily indebted to a few shadowy small-time investors who believed in his artistic future. As Andrew scrolled through Ethan's list of past creditors and professional contacts, one name snagged his attention, jarring him out of his practiced composure. It wasn't a small-time investor or another struggling artist. It was a name he recognized instantly from the internal directories of his own firm, Silas Vance, Andrew's estranged black sheep uncle who had been pushed out of the family's financial operations years ago for a complex, whispered scandal involving high-interest loans and tax evasion. Andrew leaned back in his leather chair, the realization hitting him with the force of a physical blow. The symmetry was too precise to be a coincidence. Ethan wasn't just Olivia's emotional past, he was indirectly connected to Andrew's own ugly, suppressed family history. The problem was not external, but embedded, linked to the very foundation Andrew had tried so desperately to escape. He looked at the two names side by side on the screen. Ethan Thorne, the disruptive artist, and Silas Vance, the disinherited financier. What was the connection? Did Olivia know? Did Ethan realize he was a pawn in a far more dangerous game of revenge or financial maneuvering that predated the affair? A flicker of something beyond self-pity crossed Andrew's face, raw curiosity, quickly followed by a paranoid certainty. He had to assume the worst. He had to assume the affair was merely the public-facing component of a larger systemic attack designed to compromise him. He pushed the files aside. He was no longer just managing a marriage. He was defending himself against a complex, multi-layered threat. He needed to understand the connection between his wife's past lover and his family's dark history before he made the mistake of simply neutralizing Ethan. The game had changed from high-status divorce to survival. The professional mask was slipping, revealing the anxious, deeply private man underneath, the one who had always feared that his success was a temporary loan and that the true cost of his ambition was about to be called in.
Andrew spent the remainder of the morning locked in his office, chasing the ghost of his uncle Silas. The connection was infuriatingly elusive. Silas Vance, the disgraced former family money manager, had been a cautionary tale. A shadow Andrew had always run from, a warning that beneath the polish of the Vance name lay a capacity for reckless fraud. Andrew found the original firm files, thick yellowed folders meticulously cataloging Silas's expulsion. He was looking for any link to the music scene, to the West Village, to anyone named Thorne. The files offered nothing. Silas had vanished into the peripheral world of private equity failures and offshore shell corporations. The only way to connect the dots was through Ethan. He finally emerged at noon, the suit still perfect but his face drawn and etched with a stress that transcended the professional. Olivia was in the kitchen making tea, the domesticity a jarring contrast to the tension in the air. She wore a heavy knit sweater, moving with a quiet, efficient sadness. Andrew approached the counter, not looking at her but speaking to the glass of the window, addressing the city. Ethan Thorne isn't just a musician, Olivia. Olivia set down the kettle. The steam rose, momentarily obscuring her face. He's a good distraction, Andrew. That's all he is. He is a strategic variable. Andrew turned, leaning against the cold granite. He has a financial relationship with my uncle Silas. The quiet statement hung in the air. Olivia's hand, which had been reaching for a mug, froze. She looked at Andrew, her initial defiance replaced by genuine, unsettling confusion. Silas? Your uncle? The one who... The one who made a spectacular mess and was erased from the family narrative. Yes, Ethan is currently carrying a significant high-interest note from one of Silas's former shadow entities. It's the kind of predatory financing Silas specialized in. Andrew slid the tablet across the counter, open to the financial statements showing the convoluted loan structure. He didn't threaten her with the gallery now, he needed her insight, a sign of trust he hadn't asked for in years. Olivia studied the screen, her curator's eye moving over the figures with unexpected sharpness. Ethan never talked about that side of his life. He was always broke, yes, but he said he had a silent partner who believed in his album. She frowned, tapping the screen. Silas Vance believed in his album? Silas Vance only believes in leverage and ruin. Andrew looked at her, searching for the truth beneath the performance. I need to know, Olivia. Did he ever mention my name, my firm? Did this entire reunion feel coincidental? No, her voice was quiet, definitive. It was reckless, messy, and entirely about us failing, not about your family's failures. She paused, meeting his gaze. He never mentioned Silas, but he has been incredibly curious about your legal work lately, asking tangential questions about white-collar defense, ethics in litigation. I thought it was just him trying to sound smart. Andrew absorbed the information, his internal defenses momentarily crumbling. This wasn't just a simple affair born of boredom. It was an intersection. Ethan, desperate for money, had become entangled with Silas, who now, indirectly through Olivia, had a clear path to cause maximum damage to Andrew. The true weight of his isolation hit him. Andrew had always prided himself on solving problems alone, on being the impenetrable rock. But this enemy was using the one weakness he hadn't accounted for, the emotional neglect that led Olivia back to her past. Silas hates me, Andrew confessed, the words brittle and unfamiliar on his tongue. He sees me as the successful replacement. If he can engineer a scandal that costs me the partnership, he wins a decade-long vendetta. Olivia watched her husband, the successful, controlling litigator, suddenly look smaller, human. His rigid posture seemed to soften around the edges, the certainty in his eyes momentarily replaced by a raw, painful vulnerability. This was the most honest moment they had shared since their engagement. He was not threatening her, he was admitting he was under attack, and the attack was leveraging her betrayal. A flicker of that complex, painful sympathy Andrew had foreseen in the outline passed through her. She hated his control, but seeing him this exposed, realizing she was the unwitting agent in his potential downfall, stirred a protective instinct she thought was dead. Why didn't you ever tell me about Silas? She asked not as an accusation, but as an inquiry into the landscape of their shared deceptions. Because Vances don't talk about failure, Olivia. We incinerate it and move on. You were a fresh start. You were supposed to be pristine. No one is pristine, Andrew. Especially not in New York. She took a slow breath. The silence of the kitchen profound. If this is about Silas, it's not about revenge through my heart. It's about money and power. I can help you figure out what Ethan knows. I can still call him. He trusts me. Andrew looked at his wife, truly seeing her for the first time in years. Not as an asset, but as an ally, albeit a wounded and unreliable one. The offer was a double-edged sword, a potential source of intelligence, but also the agonizing certainty that she would have to re-engage with the man who slept in their psychological bed. He hesitated, the control freak in him screaming no, but the survivalist in him recognizing the necessary risk. He picked up his scotch and nodded slowly. You're right. If this is Silas, we stop playing the husband and wife game. We play the lawyer and the reluctant witness. Get him on the phone. Do not mention Silas. Just tell him you need to meet, one last time to sort out the wreckage. The subtle shift in power was complete. They were collaborators now, bound not by love, but by the far more durable contract of mutually assured destruction.
The meeting was arranged for late afternoon at a coffee shop in Chelsea, a neutral territory,
busy enough to prevent a scene, yet anonymous enough for conspiracy. Andrew insisted on arriving alone, sitting at a small, uncomfortable metal table with an untouched espresso and a manila folder filled with legal documents he hoped he wouldn't need to open. He felt the familiar adrenaline of a closing argument, but the stakes here were far more personal than any corporate merger. Ethan arrived 10 minutes late, his expression a mixture of guarded suspicion and artistic cool. He slid into the opposite chair, pulling off a pair of expensive, noise-canceling headphones. "Olivia said you wanted to talk," Ethan said, his voice husky, his gaze sharp and unwavering. "About the situation. I told her I'm not interested in her apologies." Andrew looked at the musician, noting the subtle tension around his eyes, the stress of financial precarity, perhaps. "I'm not here to apologize, Mr. Thorne, and I'm not here to discuss my wife's affections. I'm here to discuss your financial future." Andrew reached into the manila folder and slid a simple one-page non-disclosure agreement across the table. "Sign this and you walk away clean. I will personally arrange for the full satisfaction of your current high-interest loan, the one from the entity related to Silas Vance. I will clear your debt, provide you with enough seed money to cut a professional album with a reputable legal financier, and you will never contact Olivia again, or anyone in my circle." Ethan glanced at the paperwork, then back at Andrew, a slow, condescending smile spreading across his face. "So, the corporate bully shows up with his checkbook. I figured as much." "It's not bullying, Mr. Thorne. It's an exit strategy for a temporary problem. The alternative is far less appealing." Andrew leaned forward, his voice dropping to a menacingly low level. "If you refuse, I will use my firm's resources to expose the predatory nature of your loan, linking you not only to Silas Vance's illicit operations, but potentially implicating you in the tax fraud that is intertwined with that debt. You will lose any chance of legal funding, and your reputation will be destroyed. I can bury you financially and professionally by next week." Ethan's smirk finally vanished. He looked at the paperwork, then back at Andrew, a new, unsettling fire in his eyes. "You really think it's about the money, don't you, Vance? You think everything is a transaction?" He pushed the papers back across the table, unsigned. "I won't take your blood money. Not because I'm clean, God knows I'm not, but because I saw the way Olivia looked at you, and I saw the way you looked at her, like she was a damaged piece of collateral. That is irrelevant emotional theater. No, that's the truth you refused to see. You wanted a marriage that looked good on paper, a fortress of success. I might be broke, but I showed her that she's a person, not a prop. You showed her that she's a liability, and that, Vance, is unforgivable." He paused, taking a slow, defiant sip of his lukewarm latte. "I'm not interested in your deal. I'm interested in watching the impeccable Andrew Vance finally have to pay the true cost of his perfection. If I go down, you go down in the process, because I'm not the one who broke her spirit first." Andrew felt a sudden, sickening jolt of realization. Ethan wasn't fighting for Olivia or for money. He was fighting to expose the moral bankruptcy he saw in Andrew's world, the very world that had rejected Ethan. "You're a fool," Andrew said. "You'll ruin yourself." "Maybe, but if I expose your perfect little life, if the partners at your firm realize their shining star used family debt and social media rumors to coerce a musician, you won't just lose the partnership. You'll lose the respect of every client who values integrity." Ethan's words triggered a blinding flash of insight for Andrew. Ethan was the key, but not the endgame. The true threat was not Ethan, but the structural weakness in his own life, a weakness that extended to the very top of his firm. Andrew stood up, his chair scraping loudly on the floor, momentarily drawing the attention of the cafe. He didn't look at Ethan, he looked at the window, seeing the reflection of his own controlled, terrified face. "You're right, Mr. Thorne. This isn't about the money. It's about accountability." He left the signed NDA and the manila folder on the table. He was walking away from the clean, easy solution, the destruction of Ethan, towards the far more painful, self-destructive path. He was choosing to address the root of the problem, the moral decay that had allowed him to threaten his wife and ignore the dark secrets of his ambition. He knew what he had to do, and it would cost him everything. He wasn't going to save his marriage, but he could salvage his soul.
The only way to stop Silas Vance's quiet, system corruption, and by extension, prove that his own life was not entirely built on moral compromises, was to expose the financial dirt he had found on one of the senior partners who had enabled Silas's initial escape, a move that would end Andrew's career in New York instantly. He walked out of the coffee shop, leaving Ethan stunned at the table, realizing his emotional provocation had forced Andrew into a far greater act of self-immolation.
2 days later, the silence in the Tribeca apartment was no longer sterile. It was profound, echoing with absence. Andrew had kept his word, making the call from his office. He hadn't exposed the senior partner to the authorities, not yet, but he had leaked enough undeniable, carefully anonymized information to the firm's ethics committee about Silas Vance's ongoing leverage operations to ensure the senior partner was forced into an immediate, unexpected retirement. The action was irreversible, and the cost was immediate. Andrew's promotion was terminated, his reputation within the New York legal elite was permanently stained, and his once certain future had collapsed. He returned to the apartment late that evening, the heavy front door closing with a soft thud that usually signaled the end of the day. Tonight, it signaled the end of everything. Olivia was sitting on the sofa, not in the glamorous, guarded posture she usually adopted, but curled up, small and fragile, wearing a forgotten t-shirt of Andrew's. She hadn't packed. She was just waiting. The apartment felt too large for the two of them, a gilded cage designed for a successful couple who no longer existed. Andrew walked over to the windows, looking out at the glittering, indifferent skyline. He finally spoke, his voice hoarse, stripped of all legal authority. "It's over, Olivia. The partnership, the future they promised. I gave them enough to force a retirement. I gave them enough to guarantee I won't be practicing in this city again, not at that level." She didn't move. Why? Because Ethan was right. It wasn't about the money. It was about the integrity I sacrificed to get here. I looked at the files, at all the ethical compromises I ignored for Marcus Thorne, and I realized I was becoming Silas. And I realized that threatening you, threatening the one thing you actually cared about, the gallery, that was the lowest point. I had to choose, the career or the chance to be a decent man. He turned back to her. I chose the decency. It cost me everything I built. Olivia slowly uncurled, sitting upright. Her eyes were red, but dry. She looked at him with an unsettling clarity, devoid of either gratitude or malice. You chose it for yourself, Andrew. That was the first true thing you've done in years. And I watched you do it. She paused, her voice quiet but firm. I watched you let go of the ambition that was suffocating us both. So, what happens now? He asked, the question hanging between them, heavier than any unspoken accusation. She said, I leave. Not for Ethan. I told him what you did for yourself. He was surprised. He was even impressed. But he's still chaos, and I'm done with that kind of reckless passion. I am leaving for the person I was before you and I mistook a great life for a good one. She stood up, walking towards the large, open space of the living room. We were perfect partners, Andrew. We managed the social calendar, the finances, the appearances, but we never learned how to be human together. We never allowed for the mess. When I reached for Ethan, it wasn't love. It was a violent attempt to break the glass you put around me. Andrew walked towards her, closing the distance not in anger, but in a shared, profound grief. He saw the beautiful, talented woman he had married, stripped now of her defensiveness, and felt a strange, aching regret for the man he had failed to be. I am sorry, Olivia. The words were simple, honest, and utterly inadequate. I am sorry I replaced intimacy with achievement. And I am sorry I replaced honesty with silence. We both paid the price. Your price was your career. Mine was my soul. She walked towards the master suite. When she returned, she carried only a single worn canvas duffel bag.
Not the expensive luggage he had bought her, but the bag she had used in art school. She stopped in front of him, reaching out to touch his cheek, a gesture of unexpected tenderness. "You'll be a better man now, Andrew. A better lawyer, too, if you choose the right battles." She stepped back. "I'm going back to Boston, to the quiet. I need to figure out who I am when I'm not the flawless Mrs. Vance." He didn't try to stop her. He watched her walk to the door, realizing that his grand, successful life had ended not in a courtroom drama or a passionate confrontation, but in a quiet, shared moment of painful clarity. The great, glittering city outside felt utterly irrelevant. Olivia paused at the threshold, taking one final slow look around the apartment, then at Andrew. The silence between them was the sound of two people finally letting go, not of hate, but of the immense weight of expectation. She opened the door and walked out, taking with her the last fragile illusion of their perfection. Andrew stood alone in the center of the vast, luxurious room, the scent of cedar and expensive wine suddenly smelling like dust. He had lost the partnership, lost the marriage, and lost the life he had so meticulously built. But the profound loneliness that settled over him was somehow cleaner, sharper than the chronic numbness he had lived with for years. He had paid the cost of his ambition, and the only thing left was the terrifying empty space where his heart was supposed to be. He was finally free, but standing on a wreckage of his own making.